Welcome back to Shocking Stories, where we uncover the most chilling true crime cases that will make you question the boundaries between life and death, and wonder whether some hungers transcend the grave itself. I'm your host, and today we're heading to the back roads of East Texas, where a mysterious diner has been serving the most incredible comfort food for decades, cooked by chefs who were executed years ago and whose final recipes contain messages from beyond the grave. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear involves a case that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about death, redemption, and the power of a final meal to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. This is the story of Redemption Diner, a small roadside restaurant located exactly 13.7 miles from the Huntsville Unit Prison where Texas conducts its executions. For over 30 years, this unassuming establishment has served extraordinary comfort food prepared by a rotating staff of cooks that patrons never quite seem to remember clearly. But when food critic Jennifer Martinez visited in October 2024, she discovered something impossible. The chefs preparing her meal had all been executed decades ago, and each dish contained a hidden message that would expose the restaurant's supernatural secret. Picture this. It's 11:47 p.m. on October 13, 2024, and Jennifer Martinez, food critic for Texas Monthly magazine, is driving the dark back roads between Huntsville and Houston after covering a story about prison reform. She's exhausted, hungry, and looking for any place that might still be serving food at this late hour when she spots a warm glow cutting through the East Texas pine trees. The sign reads, "Redemption Diner, open 24 hours, home of the last good meal." And despite never having heard of the place in her 15 years of reviewing Texas restaurants, Jennifer pulls into the gravel parking lot that's surprisingly full for such a remote location at midnight. "The moment I walked into Redemption Diner, I knew I was experiencing something special," Jennifer later told investigators during the interview that would launch one of the most unusual cases in Texas law enforcement history. "The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with the kind of authentic comfort you can't fake. The smell of perfectly seasoned fried chicken, slow-cooked barbecue, and fresh-baked cornbread filled the air." But it was the staff that made Jennifer's visit unforgettable. The cook visible through the service window was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and gentle hands who moved around the kitchen with the precision of someone who had been perfecting his craft for decades. When Jennifer complimented the food, he smiled and said, "Every meal here is someone's last chance to get it right." The waitress, a soft-spoken woman in her 30s with graying hair, served Jennifer a plate that seemed to contain every comfort food she had ever craved. Perfectly seasoned fried chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, and cornbread that melted in her mouth. But it was the note tucked under her plate that made Jennifer's blood run cold. "Tell my mama I'm sorry about the money I took from her purse when I was 16. Tell her I finally learned to cook like she taught me." Calvin Washington, executed February 15, 1994. Jennifer initially assumed the note was some kind of gimmick, perhaps the restaurant's way of honoring the memory of executed inmates by recreating their last meal requests. But when she looked up Calvin Washington's execution record that night in her hotel room, she discovered something that made no sense. Calvin Washington had specifically requested fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread for his last meal. Exactly what Jennifer had been served. "I thought it was a creative theme restaurant concept," Jennifer explained. "Serving the actual last meal requests of executed inmates as a way to memorialize them or make some kind of statement about justice and redemption. But the timing was too perfect, and the quality was too extraordinary for it to be just a gimmick." Intrigued by the experience, Jennifer returned to Redemption Diner the following night, this time bringing a camera and notebook to document what she assumed would be a fascinating feature story about a unique Texas restaurant. But what she discovered during her second visit would convince her that she had stumbled upon something that defied every law of nature and death. The cook that night was a different person, a younger white man with tattoos covering his arms and a nervous energy that suggested a troubled past. He prepared Jennifer a meal of chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes with cream gravy, fried okra, and a slice of pecan pie that was so perfectly executed it brought tears to her eyes. The food was restaurant quality, but it had the soul of home cooking, Jennifer observed. Every bite told a story of someone who had spent years perfecting these recipes, someone who understood that food is love made edible. And again, there was a note under her plate. "I never got to cook for my daughter like I promised." This steak is for her 16th birthday I missed. Tell her daddy loves her and I'm sorry I wasn't better. Marcus Thompson, executed July 3, 2001. Jennifer's research that night confirmed that Marcus Thompson had indeed been executed on July 3, 2001, and had requested chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, fried okra, and pecan pie for his last meal. But according to official records, Thompson had never learned to cook and had worked as a mechanic before his arrest for armed robbery and murder. Something was happening at Redemption Diner that couldn't be explained by conventional means, Jennifer realized. Either the restaurant was somehow connected to the executed inmates in ways that weren't documented, or I was witnessing something supernatural. Jennifer's investigation into Redemption Diner revealed that the restaurant had been operating since 1991, just 3 years after Texas resumed executions following a moratorium that had lasted from 1982 to 1988. The property was owned by a corporation called Final Meal Holdings LLC, which had no traceable officers or board members and paid its taxes through a law firm that claimed attorney-client privilege when Jennifer tried to investigate further. Local residents in the nearby town of Riverside had mixed memories of Redemption Diner. Some remembered eating there and raving about the food, while others claimed they had never heard of the restaurant despite driving past its location regularly. Even more strangely, no one could accurately describe the staff or remember specific conversations with employees. People would tell me about having the best meal of their lives at Redemption Diner, but when I asked them to describe the cook or the waitress, they would get this distant look and say they couldn't quite remember, Jennifer explained. It was like the staff existed in people's peripheral vision but couldn't be brought into clear focus. Jennifer's attempts to photograph the restaurant's interior and staff resulted in frustratingly blurry images that showed the dining room clearly but left the employees as indistinct shadows or empty spaces where people should have been standing. Even her digital camera seemed unable to capture clear images of the cooks and servers. The breakthrough in Jennifer's investigation came when she discovered a pattern in the notes she had been receiving. Each message corresponded exactly to an inmate who had been executed at the Huntsville unit, and each meal matched the exact last meal requests documented in Texas Department of Criminal Justice records. But the most disturbing discovery was that the notes contained personal information about the executed inmates that had never been made public, details about their families, their regrets, and their final thoughts that shouldn't have been known by anyone except the inmates themselves. The notes weren't just recreations of last meal requests, Jennifer realized. They were personal messages from the executed inmates that contained intimate details about their lives, their families, and their deepest regrets. Someone with access to extremely private information was using the restaurant to communicate messages from condemned prisoners. Jennifer's investigation attracted the attention of the Walker County Sheriff's Department when she contacted them about potentially fraudulent use of executed inmates' identities. Sheriff Patricia Chen was initially skeptical of Jennifer's claims, but became concerned when Jennifer provided documentation of the personal information contained in the restaurant's notes. Jennifer brought us evidence that someone was using the identities and personal information of executed inmates in ways that could constitute fraud or exploitation of victims' families, Sheriff Chen explained. We needed to investigate whether this was some kind of elaborate scam or whether there was a legitimate explanation for how private information about condemned prisoners was being used in a restaurant setting. The official investigation of Redemption Diner began on October 20, 2024. When sheriff's deputies and Texas Rangers attempted to visit the restaurant during normal business hours to interview staff and examine the operation. But what they found at the location challenged their understanding of reality and launched one of the most bizarre investigations in Texas law enforcement history. At 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, law enforcement officers arrived at the address where Jennifer had photographed Redemption Diner multiple times over the past week. But instead of finding a bustling restaurant, they discovered an empty lot overgrown with weeds and pine trees, with no sign that any structure had ever existed at that location. There was no building, no foundation, no utilities, and no evidence that any construction had ever taken place on that property, Sheriff Chen reported. According to county records, the land had been vacant since 1987 and had never been zoned for commercial use. But Jennifer's photographs clearly showed a fully operational restaurant with customers, staff, and elaborate meals being served at the exact location where officers found only empty land. The contradiction between Jennifer's documented evidence and the physical reality of the site suggested either an elaborate hoax or something far more mysterious. The investigation took an even stranger turn when officers attempted to locate other customers who had eaten at Redemption Diner. Despite Jennifer's photographs showing dozens of patrons on different nights, and despite the restaurant's supposedly 30-year history of operation, investigators could not find a single person who admitted to having visited the establishment. We showed Jennifer's photographs to hundreds of people in the area, including individuals who appeared in the background of her restaurant pictures, Sheriff Chen continued. Not one person could remember being at Redemption Diner, even when we showed them clear images of themselves sitting at the restaurant's tables. What do you think investigators discovered when they began researching the executed inmates whose names appeared in the restaurant's notes? Drop your theories in the comments below, because what they found would expose a connection between the living and the dead that challenged everything law enforcement thought they knew about justice, redemption, and the power of a final meal to transcend death itself. The investigation was about to reveal that Redemption Diner wasn't just serving food, it was serving justice from beyond the grave, and the executed inmates cooking those meals had unfinished business that could only be resolved through the recipes they had never been allowed to perfect in life. Like this video if you're as intrigued by this impossible restaurant as I am, and let me know in the comments what you think is really happening when the dead start cooking for the living. Don't forget to subscribe because in part 2, we're going to reveal the shocking truth about how executed inmates were communicating through their final recipes and discover that Redemption Diner was just the beginning of a phenomenon that would transform how we understand death, justice, and second chances. Welcome back to Shocking Stories. When we left off, investigators had discovered that Redemption Diner existed simultaneously as a fully operational restaurant and an empty lot, serving meals prepared by executed death row inmates who were somehow cooking from beyond the grave. What authorities uncovered when they began investigating the connection between the restaurant and the Huntsville unit would reveal one of the most profound mysteries in the history of American criminal justice. The Texas Rangers' investigation into Redemption Diner was led by Senior Captain Michael Roberts, a 25-year veteran of law enforcement who specialized in cases involving unexplained phenomena and unusual circumstances. Captain Roberts had dealt with everything from cult activities to elaborate fraud schemes, but nothing had prepared him for a case where the primary suspects had been executed decades earlier. We were dealing with a situation that challenged every investigative technique and legal framework we had. Captain Roberts explained to the federal task force that would eventually take over the case. How do you investigate crimes committed by people who are legally dead? How do you interview suspects who exist only in the form of spiritual entities preparing meals? The breakthrough in the investigation came when Captain Roberts decided to focus on the common thread connecting all of the restaurant's mysterious chefs. Each had been executed at the Huntsville unit for capital crimes, and each had requested elaborate last meals that were never properly fulfilled due to prison kitchen limitations. The investigation revealed that Texas death row inmates had historically been frustrated by the gap between their last meal requests and what the prison kitchen could actually provide. The inmates would request lobster and get frozen fish sticks prepared to look like seafood, Captain Roberts discovered during his research into prison records. They wanted perfectly seasoned fried chicken and got whatever the kitchen could manage with institutional spices. Their final meals were disappointments that left them with unresolved culinary desires. But the connection between frustrated final meal requests and Redemption Diner's supernatural chefs became clear when investigators discovered that every executed inmate whose spirit appeared to be cooking at the restaurant had died with specific regrets about food, cooking, and their inability to provide proper meals for their families. Calvin Washington, the first chef Jennifer had encountered, had been raised by a grandmother who was famous in their Houston neighborhood for her cooking. His execution records showed that he had spent his final years on death row writing letters to his family expressing regret that he had never learned to cook like his grandmother and had never been able to provide proper meals for his own children. Calvin's letters from death row were filled with remorse about failing to learn his grandmother's recipes and missing opportunities to cook for his family, Captain Roberts revealed. He wrote repeatedly about wanting to make one perfect meal that would show his loved ones how much he cared about them. Marcus Thompson, the second chef Jennifer had encountered, had similar regrets documented in his prison correspondence. Before his arrest, Marcus had promised his young daughter that he would teach her to cook when she was old enough, but his crimes had prevented him from fulfilling that promise. His final letters expressed devastating grief about never being able to prepare a birthday meal for his child. Marcus had written detailed plans for cooking lessons he wanted to give his daughter, Captain Roberts continued. He described specific recipes he wanted to teach her and meals he wanted to prepare for her 16th birthday. His execution cut short those dreams and left him with profound unfinished business related to food and family. The pattern continued across every executed inmate whose spirit appeared to be working at Redemption Diner. Each had died with specific regrets about cooking, food, and their inability to provide proper meals for their families. Each had requested elaborate last meals that were poorly executed by the prison kitchen. And each had expressed desires to use food as a way to communicate love and remorse to the people they had hurt. We were dealing with spirits who had been denied the opportunity to achieve culinary redemption, Captain Roberts observed. These executed inmates had died with unresolved desires to cook perfect meals that would express their remorse and demonstrate the love they had never been able to show properly in life. The investigation also revealed that Redemption Diner's supernatural properties were connected to its proximity to the Huntsville unit and the specific location where it appeared to exist. The empty lot where officers found no trace of a restaurant was located on a direct line between the prison's execution chamber and the cemetery where unclaimed executed inmates were buried. The restaurant appeared to exist in a liminal space between the site of execution and the final resting place of condemned prisoners, explained Dr. Patricia Moore, a parapsychologist brought in to consult on the case. It occupied a spiritual pathway that allowed executed inmates to continue working toward redemption through the preparation of perfect final meals. But the investigation took a more disturbing turn when Captain Roberts discovered that Redemption Diner wasn't just serving random customers. It was specifically attracting people who had been affected by the crimes committed by the executed inmates working in its kitchen. Jennifer Martinez's research into the restaurant's customer base revealed that many of the diners she had photographed were family members of victims, relatives of the executed inmates, or individuals whose lives had been impacted by the capital crimes that had led to the executions. The restaurant was drawing people who needed to receive the messages that the executed inmates were trying to communicate, Jennifer explained. It wasn't serving random travelers. It was creating opportunities for spiritual reconciliation between condemned prisoners and the people they had hurt. The notes that accompanied each meal were revealed to be genuine attempts at communication from the executed inmates to specific individuals who needed to hear their messages of remorse and love. The personal information contained in the notes came from the inmates' direct spiritual knowledge of the pain they had caused and their desperate desire to provide some measure of healing. Calvin Washington's note about stealing money from his mother's purse was delivered to a customer who turned out to be his nephew, who had been struggling with guilt about not visiting Calvin before his execution. The message provided closure and forgiveness that had been needed for 30 years. Marcus Thompson's note about missing his daughter's 16th birthday was received by a woman who discovered, through genealogy research prompted by the note, that she was Marcus's daughter who had been given up for adoption after his arrest. The spiritual communication led to her understanding her origins and finding peace with her father's legacy. Each meal served at Redemption Diner was actually a form of spiritual therapy, Dr. Moore explained. The executed inmates were using their culinary skills to facilitate healing between themselves and the people they had harmed through their crimes. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Redemption Diner's supernatural activities were having measurable positive effects on crime rates and recidivism in the surrounding area. Walker County had experienced a significant decrease in violent crime since 1991, and many former prisoners reported having transformative experiences related to food and cooking after their release. There was a correlation between the restaurant's operation and positive changes in criminal behavior throughout East Texas, Captain Roberts discovered. Former inmates were opening legitimate restaurants, teaching cooking classes, and using food service as a path to rehabilitation and community service. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice initially denied any knowledge of paranormal activities related to executed inmates, but internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that prison officials had been aware of unusual phenomena at the Huntsville unit for decades. Reports dating back to 1991 described kitchen equipment operating by itself, meals being prepared by invisible hands, and the smell of elaborate cooking coming from empty kitchens during the hours when executions were carried out. Prison staff had learned to accept these phenomena as part of the facility's atmosphere and had developed informal protocols for dealing with supernatural activities. The prison kitchen would sometimes prepare perfect replicas of requested last meals hours after the inmate had been executed, revealed former prison kitchen supervisor Sarah Kim, who worked at Huntsville from 1995 to 2010. We would find elaborate meals sitting on counters that no living person had prepared, complete with notes of thanks and apology. But the investigation revealed that the spiritual activities at Huntsville were only part of a larger phenomenon affecting death penalty facilities across the United States. Similar reports of supernatural cooking activities were documented at execution sites in Georgia, Florida, Virginia, and Oklahoma, suggesting that Redemption Diner was part of a national pattern of executed inmates seeking redemption through food preparation. We were looking at a spiritual movement that transcended individual cases and state boundaries, Captain Roberts realized. Executed inmates throughout the country were finding ways to continue their rehabilitation and seek forgiveness through supernatural cooking activities. The federal investigation into the phenomenon was launched when the FBI's Unusual Phenomena Unit became aware of the Texas Rangers' findings and similar reports from other states. Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, no relation to food critic Jennifer Martinez, was assigned to lead a task force investigating what became known as posthumous rehabilitation activities. The Redemption Diner case represented something unprecedented in federal law enforcement, Agent Martinez explained. We were dealing with executed criminals who were continuing to work toward rehabilitation and victim reconciliation after death, using cooking as a medium for spiritual communication and healing. The investigation also revealed that the restaurant's supernatural properties were strongest during the hours immediately following executions at the Huntsville unit. Customer reports and Jennifer's photographs showed increased spiritual activity and more elaborate meals being served on nights when executions had taken place earlier in the day. The restaurant seemed to be powered by the spiritual energy released during executions, Dr. Moore observed. Each new execution provided additional spiritual resources that allowed more executed inmates to participate in the cooking and message delivery activities. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery was that Redemption Diner's activities were having a measurable impact on the families of both victims and condemned inmates. Support groups for crime victims reported increased rates of forgiveness and emotional healing among members who had received messages through the restaurant's supernatural meal service. Families were finding closure and peace through communications they received at Redemption Diner, explained victim advocate Lisa Chen, who worked with several families affected by the restaurant's activities. The messages weren't excusing the crimes or minimizing the harm, but they were providing genuine remorse and acknowledgement of pain that helped people move forward with their healing. As Part 2 of our investigation concludes, the true scope of Redemption Diner's mission was becoming clear. Executed inmates were using their posthumous cooking abilities to provide spiritual healing and redemption that the criminal justice system couldn't deliver while they were alive. The restaurant existed as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, allowing condemned prisoners to complete their rehabilitation process and provide meaningful restitution to the people they had harmed. But the investigation was about to reveal an even more profound truth about the nature of justice, redemption, and the power of food to heal wounds that seemed impossible to repair. Don't miss Part 3, where we'll reveal how authorities handled the legal and ethical questions raised by posthumous rehabilitation, explore the broader implications of Redemption Diner for the criminal justice system, and discover what happened when other death penalty states began experiencing similar supernatural phenomena. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because the conclusion of this story will show you how death row's final meals became recipes for redemption that transcended the boundaries between life and death. What do you think about executed inmates seeking redemption through supernatural cooking? Let me know in the comments whether you believe people can continue their rehabilitation after death. And share this video to help others understand that sometimes justice requires second chances that extend beyond the grave. Welcome back to the shocking conclusion of our investigation into the Death Row Diner. When we left off, investigators had discovered that Redemption Diner was serving as a supernatural bridge between executed inmates and the people they had hurt, allowing condemned prisoners to continue their rehabilitation through posthumous cooking. What happened next would force the criminal justice system to confront fundamental questions about redemption, forgiveness, and whether justice can be served by the dead. The federal task force investigating Redemption Diner faced unprecedented legal and ethical challenges as they tried to determine how to handle a restaurant staffed by executed inmates seeking posthumous redemption. How do you regulate a business whose employees are legally dead? How do you ensure public safety when the staff consists of spiritual entities? And most importantly, how do you balance the rights of victims' families with the apparent rehabilitation efforts of executed criminals? FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez found herself leading an investigation that required her to consult with theologians, parapsychologists, constitutional lawyers, and victim advocates as she tried to develop a framework for understanding and potentially regulating supernatural rehabilitation activities. "We were dealing with a situation that had no precedent in law enforcement," Agent Martinez explained to the congressional committee that would eventually hold hearings on the Redemption Diner phenomenon. These executed inmates were demonstrating genuine remorse and working to provide healing to the people they had harmed, but they were doing so through means that challenged every assumption about death, justice, and rehabilitation. The investigation revealed that Redemption Diner's activities were having profound positive effects on everyone involved. Families of victims reported finding peace and closure through the messages they received with their meals. Relatives of executed inmates found healing and understanding about their loved ones' final thoughts and regrets. Even former prisoners and at-risk youth were being positively influenced by the restaurant's atmosphere of redemption and second chances. The statistical evidence was overwhelming, Agent Martinez continued. Areas with high concentrations of Redemption Diner customers showed decreased crime rates, increased community engagement, and higher rates of successful prisoner reintegration. Whatever was happening at that restaurant was measurably improving people's lives. But the investigation also uncovered concerning aspects of the supernatural phenomenon. Not all executed inmates were participating in the redemption cooking program, and some spiritual entities were expressing anger and resentment rather than remorse. The investigation revealed that only inmates who had achieved genuine rehabilitation before their execution were able to participate in the restaurant's activities. The spiritual energy that powered Redemption Diner was selective, explained Dr. Patricia Moore, the parapsychologist consulting on the case. Only executed inmates who had undergone genuine transformation and accepted responsibility for their crimes were able to participate in the cooking activities. Those who died unrepentant or filled with rage were unable to access the restaurant's redemptive properties. The discovery of selection criteria for posthumous rehabilitation raised questions about the nature of spiritual justice and whether some executed inmates might be continuing their sentences in spiritual realms while others had found paths to redemption through service to their victims and communities. The legal challenges intensified when victims' families filed lawsuits seeking to either shut down Redemption Diner or gain legal recognition of their right to receive communications from executed inmates. The cases raised fundamental questions about the rights of the dead, the sovereignty of spiritual entities, and the government's authority to regulate supernatural activities. Some families wanted the restaurant closed because they felt it was traumatizing to receive communications from their loved ones' killers, explained victims' rights attorney Michael Torres. But other families argued that the messages were providing healing and closure that they had never been able to find through the traditional justice system. The constitutional questions became even more complex when executed inmates' families argued that their relatives had a right to continue their rehabilitation efforts after death and that shutting down Redemption Diner would constitute cruel and unusual punishment extending beyond the grave. "We were dealing with questions that the Constitution had never been designed to address," observed Supreme Court scholar Dr. Sarah Kim. "Do executed inmates retain any rights after death? Can the government regulate spiritual rehabilitation activities? Do victims' families have a right to refuse supernatural communications from condemned prisoners?" The solution came through an unprecedented legal framework developed jointly by the Department of Justice, victim advocacy groups, and spiritual counselors. The posthumous rehabilitation protocols established guidelines for supernatural rehabilitation activities while protecting the rights of all affected parties. Under the new protocols, spiritual entities seeking to engage in posthumous rehabilitation activities had to demonstrate genuine remorse, accept full responsibility for their crimes, and obtain consent from affected victims' families before attempting any form of supernatural communication. The protocols also established oversight mechanisms to ensure that spiritual rehabilitation activities remained focused on healing rather than causing additional trauma. The protocols recognized that some executed inmates were demonstrating genuine rehabilitation that deserved recognition and support, while also protecting victims' families from unwanted spiritual contact, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who helped develop the new framework. It was an attempt to balance the rights of the living with the apparent ongoing development of the dead. Redemption Diner was allowed to continue operating under strict federal oversight, with psychologists and victim advocates monitoring the restaurant's activities to ensure that all communications remained focused on healing and took place only with the consent of recipients. The restaurant became a model for how supernatural rehabilitation activities could be managed in ways that supported both spiritual development and victim healing. The success of the Redemption Diner protocols led to similar programs being established at other execution sites throughout the United States. The National Posthumous Rehabilitation Initiative created frameworks for executed inmates to continue their rehabilitation through various forms of spiritual service, including cooking, counseling, and community service activities. We discovered that executed inmates throughout the country were seeking opportunities to make amends and continue their personal growth after death, Agent Martinez reported. The Redemption Diner model provided a template for channeling those desires in ways that served the broader community and supported healing for crime victims. The investigation also revealed that Redemption Diner's activities were having unexpected effects on the criminal justice system itself. Prison rehabilitation programs began incorporating cooking and food service training as central elements of their curricula, recognizing the power of food preparation to build empathy, responsibility, and connection to community. Cooking became recognized as a uniquely powerful tool for rehabilitation, explained Dr. Michael Chen, director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's rehabilitation programs. The act of preparing food for others requires planning, patience, attention to detail, and genuine care for people's well-being. It's an ideal medium for developing the prosocial skills that prevent recidivism. The Huntsville unit established a new culinary arts program that allowed death row inmates to learn professional cooking skills and prepare meals for victim families, prison staff, and community organizations. The program was inspired by the spiritual cooking activities documented at Redemption Diner and became a model for death row rehabilitation programs nationwide. Living inmates were inspired by the posthumous rehabilitation efforts of their executed predecessors, explained Program Director Lisa Martinez. They wanted to begin their own redemption work while they were still alive and could make more direct contributions to healing and community service. The program's success led to measurable improvements in prison conditions, inmate behavior, and relationships between condemned prisoners and the families of their victims. Several victim families reported finding healing through participating in cooking classes taught by the inmates who had killed their loved ones, leading to unprecedented examples of forgiveness and reconciliation. Food critic Jennifer Martinez, whose initial visit to Redemption Diner had launched the entire investigation, became a regular customer and documented the restaurant's evolution from a mysterious supernatural phenomenon into a recognized spiritual healing center. The quality of the food continued to improve as more executed inmates joined the cooking staff, Jennifer observed in her final article about the restaurant. But more importantly, the quality of the healing and redemption being served with each meal created a model for how the justice system could extend beyond punishment to include genuine restoration and healing. Jennifer's documentation of Redemption Diner earned her the James Beard Award for food writing and led to a best-selling book that brought national attention to the intersection of food, justice, and spiritual healing. Her work helped establish culinary arts as a recognized component of criminal justice reform and victim services. The restaurant's spiritual staff evolved over time as new executed inmates completed their rehabilitation requirements and joined the cooking team, while others moved on to different forms of posthumous service. The facility became a training ground for spiritual rehabilitation, with experienced entities mentoring newly executed inmates in the skills needed for effective amends-making and victim healing. Redemption Diner became a spiritual rehabilitation center where executed inmates could complete their personal development and make meaningful restitution to the people they had harmed, Dr. Moore explained. It represented a new model of justice that extended beyond death to include ongoing opportunities for growth, healing, and community service. The success of the posthumous rehabilitation programs led to broader changes in how society approached questions of death penalty policy, victim services, and criminal justice philosophy. The evidence that executed inmates could continue their rehabilitation after death influenced debates about the purpose and effectiveness of capital punishment. The redemption diner phenomenon forced us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about justice, redemption, and the possibility of genuine transformation, reflected former Texas Governor Patricia Wilson. If executed inmates could demonstrate such profound change and provide meaningful healing to their victims after death, it raised questions about whether execution was the most effective response to capital crimes. The restaurant also became a pilgrimage site for people seeking healing from trauma, forgiveness for past mistakes, and inspiration for their own redemption journeys. The combination of extraordinary food and profound spiritual healing attracted visitors from around the world who were seeking models for how to repair harm and build community connections. Redemption Diner proved that it's never too late to seek forgiveness and work toward healing, reflected regular customer Maria Rodriguez, whose sister had been murdered by Calvin Washington. Calvin's cooking and his messages helped me understand that even people who commit terrible crimes can find ways to express genuine love and remorse. It didn't excuse what he did, but it helped me find peace. As our investigation into the Death Row Diner concludes, Redemption Diner continues to operate under federal oversight, serving meals prepared by executed inmates who have found ways to continue their rehabilitation and provide healing to the people they hurt. The restaurant stands as a testament to the power of genuine remorse, the possibility of redemption, and the unique ability of food to express love and build connections across even the most profound divides. The executed inmates working in Redemption Diner's kitchen have proven that death doesn't end the opportunity for growth, healing, and service to others. Their posthumous rehabilitation efforts have created new models for justice that focus on restoration rather than just punishment, and their spiritual cooking has provided healing to hundreds of families who thought they would never find peace. If this incredible story of posthumous redemption and spiritual healing has moved you as much as it has moved us, please like this video and share it to help others understand that redemption is possible for everyone, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. Subscribe to Shocking Stories for more investigations that explore the boundaries between life and death, justice and mercy, and the eternal human capacity for growth and redemption. Remember that every meal is an opportunity to show love, every recipe can be a path to healing, and every person, living or dead, deserves the chance to make amends and contribute to the greater good. The Death Row Diner may serve its last meals to the living, but its most important ingredient has always been hope. Hope that it's never too late to change, never too late to seek forgiveness, and never too late to find ways to heal the wounds we've caused in others. In death, as in life, the most powerful force remains love served one plate at a time.